Reverse by Black K. Cat. Chapter 24. Eunoia. It's possible Kurama may have been a little hasty in choosing to come to Uzushio. Fuji rubs up against his ankles as he steps forward, grimly staring over the expanse of rubble and ruins that was once a thriving hidden village. Small, maybe, populated mainly by Uzumaki and the handful of nearby fishermen's sons and daughters who dreamed of something bigger, but by all rights, Kurama should have little attachment to this place. It was the home of two of his jailers, seen during visits the handful of times Mito was able to bring herself to leave Kanaa. Kushina left before its destruction, if only barely, and afterwards she never wanted to go back. Kurama's finding is not all too keen on the idea either. It looks like Kusa, the first village to fall to Kaguya. Not exactly the same, maybe. Uzushio was built with coastal stone heavy enough to withstand the sea and rising in terraces up into the hills, colorful and chaotic and very much a mirror of its inhabitants. Kusa was more barren, more serious, touched with a blatant edge of defiance in the face of Kaguya's approach that they suffered for when they fell. They thought that with Shinobi having held her off once, they'd be able to do it again. They didn't realize that even the boys who defeated her before weren't enough to manage it a second time, not without the miracles that had given them their victory the first time. Another brush of fur against the skin of his ankle, three tails flickering against his knee, and Fuji asks softly, "Kurama-sama?" There are bones here, mixed in and among the stone and decaying wood. There weren't bones in Kusa because Kaguya took as many bodies as she could to animate like sick, decaying puppets and burned the rest. Kurama steps forward, bare feet just slightly unsteady as the rubble shifts and can't quite remember walking all the way out here. He's alone when he looks up, all but for Fuji. The children are back closer to where they landed, Fu with her hands on Gaara's shoulders as she stands warily behind him, eyes searching the surrounding hills. Yugito is crouched down in front of Naruto, murmuring rapid words that don't quite make it to Kurama's ears, and he wonders if she knows anything about the Uzumaki clan. It should be him explaining all of this to Naruto, except it looks like Kusa when Kaguya was through with it, tumbled houses and shattered walls and the bones of a civilization mixed with the rubble. Kurama picks his way past leg bones half buried in the dirt, a shattered skull beneath the stones of fallen archway. It doesn't look looted. Hardly looks touched, for that matter. No one came to bury the dead, and Kurama is startled by how furious he feels at the thought. Whirlpool Country is a tiny place, but some people must have survived. Uzushio Gakure was hardly the only village on the island, and that no one bothered, no one cared enough. Fur brushes his cheeks as Fuji leaps onto his shoulder, slides around his neck. She licks his cheek, gently nips his ear, and Kurama startles. He misses his next step, stumbles, only just manages to get a hand up in time to steady Fuji as he goes down, landing hard on his knees. Kaguya, he thinks, and it's like times are blurring in his head, like now has suddenly become then, and Uzushio had changed to Kusa, to Iwa, to Kuma, to Suna. There's not enough evidence to make his mind believe that he's not seeing Kaguya's handiwork, that Uzushio fell long before her plots reached their conclusion. And mixed in with the ruined village is Naruto, falling, dying, breaking blood on a shirt, and one last smile for Kurama on his lips. It hurts, aches so badly that for a moment Kurama can't even breathe. Then footsteps clatter against skidding stone, hasty and incautious. A familiar voice cries, "Kuramani!" And a bare second later, a small body slams into his chest. Kurama startles, claws coming up in a sharp slash, but small calloused hands catch them gently, one on each side. Another body presses against his back, short arms attempting to wrap around his chest. "Kuramani?" Naruto asks again, and he's not dead. He's not the victim of Kaguya's madness and greed. Not this time. He's here, and safe, and alive, and Kurama chokes on a sound that's very much like a sob. There are still hands holding his wrists, Fu and Yugito pressing in from the sides and already familiar with a shinobi's instincts in the midst of pain, and Kurama doesn't try to pull away. He slumps forward instead, shoulders rounding, dropping his head on top of Naruto's bright hair and pressing back into Gaara's determined hold. I'm here, Kit, he murmurs and pretends he can't feel his eyes burning. I'm sorry, I'm here and I'm not going anywhere, I promise. You can go anywhere you want to, Naruto tells him stubbornly. But me and Gora and Fu and Yugito are coming too. That startles a laugh out of him, rough and surprised. What did I do to land myself with all four of you? He asks, but the complaint doesn't even pretend a carrying bite, and Naruto just grins. You became our Kurama, he informs Kurama cheerfully, and you don't get to take it back, ever! Throat tight, Kurama gently tugs his hands away from the girls, then hooks his fingers around their waists and drags them down into a hug, wrapping his arms around as much of the three of them as he can. Come here, Squirt, he orders, groping blindly behind him. You're not getting out of this either. I don't want to get out of it, Gaara tells him solemnly, letting himself be grabbed and dragged into the embrace, and he leans into Kurama's shoulder like it's exactly where he wants to be. Lower down, half squished by a giggling Fu and a flushed Yugito, Naruto makes a sound of wordless complaint and wriggles upwards, planting his feet on Kurama's thighs and getting enough height to wrap his arms around Kurama's head. Yeah! He agrees. I don't want that either! You give the best hugs, Kurama-ni! If he does, it's only because he remembers the one Naruto gave him right before the end, all warmth and certainty and kindness as hot as sunlight after a long winter, and shot through with the certainty that Kurama would save them all. He laughs again, and it's easier this time, freer, because while he's still mourning his Naruto, it's a heck of a lot harder with that sun-bright smile 3 inches from his face. Well, you four aren't doing all that badly yourselves, he answers, squeezing a little more tightly. Fu huffs softly, resting her head on his free shoulder and reaching up to stroke Fuji's fur. If we were better, we wouldn't have let you get sad in the first place, she counters. I'm sorry, Kurama-ni. We'll pay better attention next time, Yugito agrees, offering the younger girl a quick flash of a smile before she turns serious eyes on Kurama. I'm sorry too, Kurama. I didn't think... But you're an Uzumaki too, kind of. More or less, Kurama agrees, because he might as well be by virtue of the body he unintentionally hijacked. Besides, he knows his Naruto, nominally clan head since Kushina's death, since Nagato wasn't exactly an appropriate candidate, well enough to be certain that the idiot would have eagerly jumped on the idea and not let up until Kurama agreed. And you guys have nothing to apologize for. I just wasn't expecting there to still be bodies here. It threw me for a second. People say the ruins are haunted by those who died in the attack, a matter-of-fact voice offers, and in a flash Kurama is on his feet, snarling, claws up and ready as he puts himself squarely in front of the children. Fuji yelps as she goes flying from his shoulders, but gamely turns her fall into a flip and lands as a fox the size of a pony, teeth bared and a growl rumbling in her chest. On Kurama's other side, Momiji flows past his leg, mirroring his sister with deadly silence, all 5 of his tails fanned down and very obvious. Clearly, slightly startled, the weathered-looking older woman before them takes a step back, raising her hand. Peace, she says. I'm just a fisherwoman, not a ninja. There's a school of blue fish between 2 of the whirlpools, and I was looking for the best way to get to them when I heard you. Still wary, but willing to accept her story for the moment, Kurama inclines his head and lowers his hands, shifting back on his heels. I thought the ghost stories came after the bodies were buried, he says, glancing at the stark white bones visible around them. Her mouth quirks slightly, halfway between a smile and a grimace. Usually, she allows, but usually the dead aren't Uzumaki. Legend has it that it was the ghosts that rose even as the bodies fell who chased the Kirinin out. It's a good story, and it's clearly kept the looters away. Kurama takes another look, spotting flashes of steel from dropped weapons. A few feet away from them, there's another glint of metal, duller but still enough to catch his eye. Kurama steps over to it, leaving the foxes to guard Naruto and the rest, and crouches down. The bits of fabric clinging to it dissolve in his hand, falling victim to the sea air and the years that had passed, but the hitayate is still a familiar weight in his palm. He remembers his first night in this time, wishing he still had either of Naruto's old hitayate, Ganaha, or Alliance, both equally well remembered. And this isn't anything Naruto would have claimed, but Mito wore one once upon a time. Kushina earned hers when she accepted her mission to become the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, even if she later earned another in Konoha. Maybe Kurama isn't actually an Uzumaki, but he has the blood, the hair, the temper. He feared and admired both Mito and Kushina, and he wonders now, with the benefit of exposure to Naruto, whether he could have loved them too, just as fiercely as he does his third Jinchuriki. Probably. After all, Naruto was always so much like Kushina, and Mito was a force of nature to rival Kurama himself. He likes that kind of thing in a human. He closes his hand around the hitayate, brushing his thumb over the familiar spiral, and checks the backing. It should take no work at all to replace the cloth, and maybe he'll wear it. Or just keep it, if that never appeals. There are worse mementos to hold on to, and worse ways to honor his first and second Jinchuriki. They led him to Naruto, after all, and he'll always be grateful for that. Straightening, he tucks the metal plate inside his shirt snug against his skin and turns to find the fisherwoman watching him, her expression considering. Dark eyes linger on his red hair, then slide down to study Naruto, ignoring the boy's warily aggressive expression, and then Gaara with his crimson hair. She hums softly to herself and says, "You're Uzumaki, aren't you?" "Yeah," Kurama says, because it's an easy enough exaggeration. "Uzumaki Kurama, and this is Naruto, Fu, Gaara, and Yukito." Coloring-wise, he supposes they all could be related, with a bit of suspension of disbelief. Naruto looks like Kushina, like a lot of Uzumaki, and Gaara's hair is red enough to pass. Fu's skin is only a little lighter than his own, and a little darker than Naruto's, and Yukito is blonde enough to be related to Naruto. It's at least not completely inconceivable, and the woman suggested it herself. She'll be all too happy to believe it, since it was her idea in the first place. The woman nods, satisfied, and offers, "I'm Takeda Anzu, head woman of the village of the eastern point of the island. You've been gone for a while, Uzumaki." "Kurama," he corrects, because he may have claimed the name and the relation, but he's not about to overuse it, here of all places. Maybe souls don't linger, but they could. Kurama's had too many experiences with people waiting for loved ones between worlds. He's not about to test the patience of an entire city full of the dead. "I was busy." Her gaze flickers to the children again, and she smiles a little. "I can see that." Before Kurama can even start to bristle, a small hand twists into the hem of his ayori, and Naruto whispers fearfully, Kuramani, are there ghosts here? We're gonna get eaten and killed and haunted!" Oh yeah, Naruto's ridiculous thing about ghosts. Kurama smothers a smile, reaching down to pick up the boy and hoist him onto his hip. Yeah, you'll be fine. I promised to protect you, didn't I? That includes from ghosts just as much as living idiots. He assesses their little group, trying to judge. Momiji and Fuji will need at least a few hours to recover from the flight here, and by that time it will be dark, so they might as well find somewhere to hunker down overnight. He really doesn't want to come on Kiri in broad daylight. Even coming in under the cover of darkness will be tricky enough. My sons should have dinner ready shortly, Anzu offers unexpectedly, making Kurama blink at her. She smiles just a little, and despite the lines it puts in her sun-browned face, it's a kind expression. I've always wondered if any Uzumaki survived, and whether they'd return if they did. Consider it my thanks for settling a long-standing bet with myself, if nothing else. Food sounds amazing, Kurama thinks, and tries not to remember when he last had a full hot meal. Before he arrived, Naruto and the rest of the survivors had been living on carefully rationed stores that they had no way to replace, always just enough to keep them alive, but no more. This body is used to a lack of food, but that doesn't mean Kurama has to like it. Thank you, he says, trying not to wince as Naruto's stomach roars. I'm out of money. Anzu actually chuckles at that. Feeding 4 growing brats, I'll bet you are, she answers with humor. And this island is peaceful, so there won't be much call for shinobi work here. His older brother was married to Uzushio's head woman, and I'm sure he'll have some sort of solution. Uzushio earned our gratitude pushing Kira back like they did. If they hadn't, we'd be an extension of the bloody mist, and only a fool would know who to thank for the fact that we went. Kurama's fingers curl into Naruto's shirt and he breathes carefully to control the roiling of his chakra. Whatever Kiryu was looking for that made them invade, made them slaughter an entire city, Kurama hopes they found it. And choke on it, preferably! Thanks, he says again and wonders if it really is feasible. The daimyo are political powers, definitely, but for a country like Whirlpool, with a handful of people and a brisk trade in salted fish, the man won't exactly have a lot of sway. Still, if Kurama can convince him to keep it a secret, and the Uzumaki name might be enough to do so, it might work. It would be a far sight better than forging on blindly with no resources. There's a tug on the hem of his shirt, and Kurama looks down to see Gaara staring up at him, eyes wide and not quite demanding enough to be entreating, but certainly hopeful. With a low and mostly theatrical groan, Kurama crouches down and scoops the boy up in his free arm, boosting him up onto his hip. "Anyone else?" he asks grumpily, eyeing the girls. Yugito instantly flushes, shaking her head quickly, but Fu laughs with reckless abandon, tucks around behind Kurama, and leaps onto his back like a monkey. She hooks her knees around his sides just above where he's holding Gaara and Naruto and leans over his shoulder, looping her arms around his neck. "Thanks, Kurama," she says brightly. "I'm going to drown you." Kurama grouches, though he doesn't even try to sound like he means it. These kids have had enough people threaten to do them harm. "No, you're not," Fuji says sweetly, sliding up next to him and leaning heavily into his side. "If you didn't do it the first 17 times you said it, you're not going to do it now." "I could!" Kurama protests, not liking where this conversation is going. Momiji snorts, leaning into his other side to balance on his sister. "No, you couldn't," he answers dryly. "I'll turn all of you into stew," Kurama tells them. "All of you. It'll be stringy and tough, but it will be what all of you deserve." "I love you, Kurama-ni," Naruto says cheerfully and gives him a loud, slightly clumsy kiss on the cheek. Never one to be outdone, Gaara mimics him on the other side, and Fu, laughing brightly, leans in to do the same. "Gross!" Kurama mutters, but he waves his left elbow at Yugito until she slips her hand around his arm and then turns to look at their unexpected host. Anzu is still watching silently, but her face is graced in a warm, fond smile, and when she sees that she has Kurama's attention, she tips her head towards the curve of the shore. "This way," she says, and when she turns and starts walking, Kurama falls into step with her. "Don't you need to check on your fish?" he asks after a moment. The woman hums. "They're trapped by the whirlpools until the current shifts. I should have at least a week unless a storm blows in before then. From the look of you, I assume you won't be staying anywhere near that long." She's perceptive. Kurama isn't certain whether it's just from experience or if he looks that worn down and desperate. "No, we can't. One night should be fine, but we're popular for all the wrong reasons." Thankfully, Anzu accepts that with a tip of her head. "People's reasons for wanting Uzushio gone were always more about wanting the Uzumaki clan gone," she says a little sadly. "I've traveled up and down the coast for years, but I've never seen another one. Not that I could recognize, at least. Not until you." "Kushina went to Konoha. There's at least that." Kurama shifts Naruto a little, not looking at anything beyond the rolling blue-gray of the ocean. Naruto, he's your son." "And a fine job Konoha is doing taking care of him. The same way they took care of her," Anzu answers tartly, and then catching the surprise that Kurama can't quite hide, she sighs and deflates a little. "Forgive me. Uzushio and Konoha were allies, friends, going back to the time when there was just the Senju and the Uzumaki. But they didn't come. My aunt was a shinobi and she died on the walls before they fell. Konoha never came, even after the news of the village destruction reached them. I hold a grudge and I don't care to hide it." She must have been 15, probably, or a little older when it happened, Kurama judges. Children take the loss of those close to them hard. Saying sorry won't do anything, won't help ease what's clearly still an ache, so Kurama simply nods. "Nothing to forgive," he says, and his voice emerges rough. Thank you for all of this. We're not assuming we were enemies." "I'm not a shinobi," she reminds him, but her eyes say she knows very well what he means. "Even if you were, all I could do was beat you with a fishing rod." It might as well be, "You're welcome," and "My pleasure," for all that it remains unvoiced. "Leave those rags," Anzu says briskly. "I'm going to burn them. They're not even fit for scrubbing floors." "Excuse me!" Kurama hisses, one hand on his shirt. He keeps his voice low because Naruto, Gaara, and Fu are still asleep, sprawled out across the main room, but makes sure to inject as much indignation as he can into the words. The expression Anzu favors him with is entirely unimpressed. "My late husband's clothes will fit you," she informs him. "Wear them instead of that. I'm surprised you haven't got something deadly and contagious off of it at this point." "I've been traveling," Kurama protests, "and I spent most of my money on food and lodging. There wasn't exactly a lot left for anything else." Thankfully, there's nothing even remotely similar to pity in Anzu's expression, just understanding humor. "And now you don't have to spend anything. Take the clothes. Kay certainly isn't going to be wearing them anymore, and they're just gathering dust here. Wear these and I'll pack the rest." This isn't an argument. Kurama is going to win, so he swallows the pride that makes him want to protest, takes the pile of fabric she hands him, and says, "I appreciate it." Anzu smiles slightly. "I raised 2 boys and a hellion daughter, Kurama. A little help always makes things easier. Change, and when you're ready, I'll take you to see the daimyo." Out the door of the small, slightly crooked house, Kurama can see the sun just starting to break the horizon. He gives it an assessing glance, judging how much long they're going to have before the freak squad, or kakuzu, turns up, and then starts pulling on the clean kimono shirt and loose pants. They're nothing fancy, worn but serviceable, and lovingly mended in several places, but they're far warmer than the ragged remainders of Han's old clothes, and fit a lot better. "Don't you need an appointment to see the daimyo?" he asks as the fisherwoman turns away, ladling up a bowl of the same thick rice porridge she served him for breakfast. It's the kind of stuff Naruto used to complain about Sasuke forcing him to eat the few times he actually got sick. But Kurama is never going to take it for granted again. Hot food of any kind is a blessing. Anzu snorts. "The daimyo of other countries, maybe. But Takauji puts his pants on one leg at a time, just like the rest of us. He's to be respected, certainly, but he doesn't have enough people to make us stand on ceremony all the time. We've too much to do. I would recommend you leave the children here, though. We may have to wait if he's busy." Kurama stiffens automatically, not liking that idea at all. Even so, before he can manage to open his mouth, Yugito offers, "Matatabi says she'll watch us." Ignoring Anzu's flicker of confusion, Kurama turns to the blonde, who accepts her bowl of porridge with a thankful murmur. "Oh, so now she can watch you brats." He huffs, and if it's slightly sour, he thinks he's entitled. "Useless witch of a cat." Yugito levels a rebuking look at him. "Matatabi says you're a grumpy old bastard with no sense of humor, but she likes the rest of us. She'll keep watch." Well, that's what Kurama was originally hoping for when he made tracks for Kumo, so he supposes he can't really complain much. Still, he levels a dark look at his sister, hoping she'll see it through Yugito's eyes, and growls, "She'd better. Stay safe." "Okay, kitten." Yugito blushes a little, ducking her head, but after a moment she looks up again and meets his eyes. "I'll keep them safe," she promises, and the determination turns her eyes to steel. "I swear I will." These broken children are definitely going to be the death of him. Kurama sighs, crouching down in front of her so he can meet her eyes squarely. "Keep yourself safe, too," he reminds her, reaching out to tug gently on her rebraided hair. "I don't know what I'd do if something happened to any one of you. I've lost enough people. You get in trouble, look for an opening, and run. Find me, got it?" Mutely, Yugito nods, and Kurama gives her a smile, leaning in to kiss her forehead before he stands. "Ready to go?" he asks Anzu. "Whenever you are," she agrees and gives Yugito a smile of her own. "It's about an hour walking, so we likely won't be back before noon." "Yeah, no, we're not walking," Kurama informs her flatly, the idea of leaving the kids for so long sticking in his craw, and sticks his head out the door. Fuji and Momiji are sprawled across the porch, ripping into a pile of fish with enthusiasm, and Kurama clears his throat to get their attention. When they both look up, he asks, "Think one of you can haul us over to the village where the daimyo lives?" "I can," Momiji offers immediately, rising to his feet. Fuji steals his half-eaten fish right out from between his paws, and it gives her an aggravated growl. "Annoying little sisters can stay and watch the skulk. Don't get into trouble, okay?"
Fuji flips her tails at him, but her mouth is so full that she can't quite manage an answer. Well, this'll certainly be a story to tell at the bar, Anzu says with amusement. Not that anyone will believe me.
Humans, Momiji scoffs, and Kurama rolls his eyes, vaulting onto the Reynard's back. Right, because we're all terrible even when they give you all the food you can stuff your face with.
He raises a challenging brow at Anzu, who's hovering warily a few feet back, and her expression firms. She swings on behind him, wrapping an arm around his waist, and as soon as she's seated, Momiji takes 3 long, bounding strides and launches himself into the air.